This is Money Made Simple, the financial podcast that keeps it simple and gets to the point.
Kia ora and welcome back to Money Made Simple, brought to you by Simplicity. So there's been a lot of noise recently, certainly in our industry, the financial industry, but kind of wider than that, like across social media channels, the news, around what we call Budget 2025, and that's from the government, which they've announced pretty recently, right?
Yeah, so do you want to tell us what is the budget and what is Budget 2025?
Yeah, so basically the budget outlines what the current government in power is going to spend over the next 12 months. So that would be the obvious stuff that you'd think of, like what they're going to spend on healthcare, like building new hospitals, what they're going to put into education, defence, all of those kind of big broad categories, but also long-term investments on like infrastructure and whatnot.
Yeah, and the budget can kind of seem like politics and a bit kind of boring, but actually it's relevant to all of us. It affects our lives. So Shamabeel did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, I think, which really looked at the budget in detail and broke down what that means for us as individuals.
Yeah, he also did a big webinar for members where there was question and answers on government spending and all the changes. So yeah, so you can check out YouTube for both of those videos. In a nutshell, with Budget 2025, the government announced that it would be around controlling spend and pulling back versus, spending on lots of things. So you might have heard the term austerity budget.
Yes.
That's been quite a common thing that people have been talking about. But yeah, less on long-term investments, more on keeping the economy under control.
Yep, and that's going to be popular with some people and not with others.
Yes.
But that's the same with every budget every year. Yeah.
But the biggest changes that we want to talk about today are around the KiwiSaver changes, and obviously that's fairly relevant to us, to Simplicity as a KiwiSaver provider. So we thought that we would go through the three major changes and explain a little bit more around what they mean for you and the good, the bad, probably a little bit ugly, and how they'll impact you depending on your life situation.
Yeah, and both now and in the long term, because it's going to have an impact immediately, but it also is going to have an impact in the long term.
Yeah, and that really is depending on your own situation, like your employment, your age and everything.
Yeah. So should we start with the first change, and it's probably the most significant, and that is increasing the compulsory rate of contribution. So currently we all have to do a minimum contribution of 3%, and our employers have to do that as well. And the plan is to increase that to 4% over a period of time. Now we're really supportive of this. We think our contribution rates are quite low compared to similar schemes around the world.
Yeah.
So this is awesome. They're going to do it over
a very long time.
Yeah. I don't know why, but quite a long time. So initially, from April next year, they're going to increase it by 0.5%. So it's going to go to 3.5%.
So for both the employee and the employer?
Yes, for both. And then 2 years later, 2028, it will increase to 4%.
Yep, so it's a graduated change. I think a lot of people probably just think it's going straight to 4% and 4%.
Well, I think the main reason is to help employers because they are going to be required to increase their contribution rate. This gives them some time to plan for that. It is possible to opt out
of the increase.
So you can apply to the IRD if you want to stick at the 3% rate, but that's very likely to mean that your employer will also match you at the 3%, so you're missing out on that additional
potentially,
percent.
Unless they decide to go ahead anyway.
There might be some employers that will,
Yep.
stick with the 4. It does mean that for people to opt out of it, you have to take action. So the easier thing is that people's rates are just going to increase.
Which I think is the right way, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yep.
Let's move on to the second big change. This one less positive in our eyes, right?
Yeah.
And that is around the government halving their yearly contribution. So currently you can get up to $521 a year if you're eligible from the government. From this next KiwiSaver year, which started in July 2025, you will only be able to earn up to $261, so half of what has previously been given if you're eligible.
So just to be clear, the KiwiSaver year that we've just finished, people will be eligible for up to $521. But for the coming
From this
KiwiSaver
earning year onwards,
yes, it will drop.
Now, and another interesting thing about it is they haven't halved the amount that you have to earn in order to get the government contribution. So it's still that $1,043 that you have to contribute to be able to get the 261. So previously it used to be, it was 50 cents that the government would contribute towards your dollar.
Yep.
Now they will contribute 25 cents to the dollar up to that amount.
Is a lot less, but it's still a 25% return on your investment of over $1,000. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's better than nothing.
Yes. There's another change to this government contribution as well, while we're still on this topic, is that it's now going to be means tested, but in a very blunt way in my eyes. So if you earn over $180,000, either through wages or paying yourself, you no longer are eligible at all for the government contribution.
Yeah. I think if you're earning that much money, a contribution of $200 and something is probably not such a big deal. But it's a cost saving thing for the government.
Yeah, for that very small percentage that earn that over that amount.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, and then there's one more change, and this is we've gone a good change, a not so good change, back to a good change. And this is that younger people are now going to be eligible for employer and government contributions. So they're extending the scheme to 16 and 17-year-olds. Anyone can join KiwiSaver. You can join KiwiSaver from birth, but
your parents can join you up from birth.
Prior to this, you haven't been eligible for any of those benefits until you're 18. And because KiwiSaver is really for young, it's such a great scheme for young people. The longer you're in it, the more money you're going to earn through compounding returns. So that's a really great incentive for young people to get started earlier.
Getting saving earlier, right?
I mean, I think it's worth it even without those benefits, but this just adds.
Absolutely. Cool. So those are the three main changes. We thought we might just quickly go over some impacts of these changes, both short-term and long-term, and a couple of scenarios which people might be thinking about, because we got a lot of questions from our members, all of which Shamabel has answered in that webinar on YouTube that we mentioned.
Yep.
Cool. So firstly, someone on an average wage in New Zealand, which is around the 75k mark, they will roughly be contributing or saving into their scheme around $1,000 more per year.
Just by that increase in 1%.
Yes, right. Exactly. So if they're on 75-ish K. If they opt out of that extra contributions, so you don't get the employee extra 1%, and you also then don't get the employer 4%, you only get 3%, plus for some reason you're not eligible for the government contribution, you're leaving around $2,000 a year on the table. So that means $2,000 less into your KiwiSaver fund compounded over many years. So could make quite a big impact long term.
Yeah. What it does mean, though, the flip side of that is because you're making 1% additional contribution yourself, for most people, they are actually going to see a small reduction in their take-home pay.
Yes. So I think it's around $750 or so.
Over the year.
For an average earner. It will be different, obviously, depending on how much you earn.
Which isn't a huge amount, but that could make a difference for some people. But that's a reason to opt back to the 3%, not to opt for a savings suspension and not contribute at all, but keep that at a rate that you can. But I think people do need to be aware that on a week-to-week basis, they might be slightly worse off cash in hand, but for the long term,
in order to be better off.
Yeah.
Also interesting to note that starting from 16 in terms of contributing employee and employer contributions, rather than 18, there's potentially a significant amount that you would then have at retirement age. So on an average income profile over, say, 40 years of earnings, so from 16 to 65, that could be around 50k extra in nominal terms, or if you want to adjust for inflation, you'd have at least 20k extra.
So that's just from starting to contribute a bit younger.
And like taking an average earner that goes from minimum wage, say, up to a bit more as they get older. So quite a lot of extra saving.
It's a meaningful amount of money.
Yeah, it is. Also, another really interesting thing for me is that the government net take, so the ESCT tax, which is the tax that they get from the employer contributions, and also from halving those contributions to people who are eligible by half. The government are actually getting a lot more tax and having to pay a lot less in that government contribution subsidy, which means it's a net gain to the budget for them.
That is interesting. But I guess they're putting the onus, the responsibility on the employers and on individuals, right?
Yeah. It is quite unprecedented for if you look at super and pension schemes around the world. That's not usually what nations do, for the government to take more out of the scheme rather than to contribute more. So
we've talked a little bit about that in our tax episode, but that's what we've got. This is the system that we've got. So at least some of these changes are going to have a net benefit for most KiwiSaver members. Yeah.
So those are some of the impacts. Let's just go through a couple of scenarios from people that are wondering how it will affect them within particular situations.
Okay, so you're thinking about self-employed people, for example?
Yeah, let's go with that first.
Okay, so a self-employed person doesn't have to make contributions. They're going to be making voluntary contributions anyway. If they are making under the 180K threshold, or that's how much they're paying themselves, then they might want to think about just making the contribution to get that government contribution.
And that is still around $20 per week.
Yep.
Because you still have to contribute the 1043 to get the 261, right?
And then because they're not going to benefit from additional employer contributions, because they are both the employer and the employee, they might want to look at other investment options, potentially, if they have more money to
in addition to KiwiSaver.
In addition to KiwiSaver. Yep. I think we were talking about this before, because this is a bit of a personality thing. Like, I would probably still need to put it in KiwiSaver because I would need it to be locked up. But if you have the discipline to do so, you might spread it over a KiwiSaver and an investment fund.
Yeah, and that also applies to people earning over 180K that are freelancers or self-employed. So if you have that discipline that you talk about, then there is the option, because you won't get that government contribution of $261, there's maybe not so much incentive anymore to be in the scheme. If you know that you can go into investment funds or some other long-term method that will make sure that you are still setting yourself up for retirement, then you might not look at KiwiSaver. But if you are not so good at doing that kind of long-term saving, because we all need to, I mean, super isn't going to carry us in the future, then it might still be a good idea to be in KiwiSaver.
So in some imaginary world where you and I earn over 180K, I'll go in KiwiSaver and you can just put it in an investment fund.
Exactly, yes. So yeah, depends on your own values, ways, motivations.
Yeah.
Someone that is employed, maybe a lower wage earner that's really struggling with the cost of living, putting food on the table, being able to afford all the normal costs, with that 3% going up to 4%, it might be worth considering doing what we talked about and opting out via the IRD to keep it at 3%, right?
Yeah, I think so. Although because it's incremental, it's going up 0.5% initially, it would be worth seeing what that looks like for people.
Might not be as much as you think.
Not opting out like straight away, just go, okay, what does 3.5% look like? Is my budget still working? And then, not making a decision before you see what
how much actually take-home pay it means for you. Yes.
And then the next move is only another 0.5% again. So I think it could work for people on a tight budget as well, that kind of slower incremental increase.
But if it's your only option, then the option is there on the table. Yes. Just remember that means that your employer doesn't have to contribute that increased amount, and that is actually a big deal and could mean 50K in the long term.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Also, kids in KiwiSaver, is it worth putting them into KiwiSaver before age 16? We've talked about this in previous episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth putting your kids in KiwiSaver as soon as you can. But definitely now, I think there's so many young people that do work part-time or full-time, 16, 17. That's a real motivator to get into the scheme, to get both the government and the employer contributions.
And the advantage of having compounding returns working for you for longer.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer for young people, I reckon.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so finally, let's just quickly chat about our thoughts, personal reflections on the changes. So what are you kind of thinking about the most when it comes to your life?
Well, I'm thinking it'd be good. I've been talking about increasing my own contributions to 4% for ages, so that's good. Just do it for me. It's just another thing on my admin list that I haven't done. So I think for the young people in my life, it's particularly awesome.
So you've got a positive spin on it.
I do, yeah.
I think for me, I'm just really annoyed at how the government have kind of made it all onus on us and our employers versus, helping out. Like it's less of a kind of social good. Yeah, so halving that contribution, even thinking about earning 180K and all of those people that will basically not see any point anymore. Like great for, we don't have kids, so great for those people that are younger, and I think that will help the youth think about KiwiSaver a little bit earlier. But selfishly, for my own good, I'm gutted about the halving of the government contribution.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a meaningful cut because getting a 50% return on your investment, that's really pretty awesome. And that's before you've earned any returns and the compounding impact of that. But I think $200 just doesn't sound like a lot of money.
No.
And I think particularly for people who are self-employed, it's going to be harder to motivate themselves to put that money into KiwiSaver. But I don't know, I guess we'll see what people do.
Watch this space.
Yeah,
it'll be really interesting to check back in a year or two and see what those numbers are in terms of enrolled, contributing, all of
So
that.
they're kind of given with one hand and taken a little with the other, but mostly it's net benefit for people.
Yeah. So let's finish on a positive. It's a solid savings scheme. Make the most of the changes to your advantage, and keep checking in at least, say, once a year on your KiwiSaver scheme. And making sure it's the right fund for you, the right provider, all of that good stuff.
All of that stuff is going to make a big difference in the long run.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's wrap it up there.
right.
Hope you found this useful in terms of understanding the changes and what it might mean for you. Check out those other resources that we have if you would like to deep dive a little bit more. And we will catch you next time.
Okay. Ka kite.
This podcast contains personal opinions and is intended to provide educational information only. It doesn't relate to your particular financial situation or goals and is not financial advice or recommendations. Simplicity New Zealand Limited is the issuer of the Simplicity KiwiSaver scheme and investment funds. For product disclosure statements, please visit Simplicity's website simplicity.kiwi.